Pack your things and get out. You've embarrassed this family enough. My father said it the way he said everything, quietly, like the words didn't cost him anything. That was somehow worse than shouting. I was 34 years old, standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold. My younger sister was sitting at the table, pretending to look at her phone. My mother was facing the window above the sink. Nobody looked at me directly. Nobody had to. Dad, I'm not finished. He pulled out a chair and sat down, which meant this was going to be a real conversation. The kind where only one person speaks. You dropped a client worth $200,000. You missed the Hendricks filing deadline. And now I'm hearing from your uncle that you've been pitching some side project on company time. He folded his hands on the table. What exactly do you have to say for yourself? I opened my mouth, then I closed it. The truth was, I had been pitching a side project. But it wasn't a side project. It had never been a side project. For 3 years, I'd been building something on evenings and weekends and every stolen lunch break I could get. A software platform for small independent contractors in the trades. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, people who were incredible at their work, but drowning in invoicing, scheduling, and HST filings. I had 12 beta users. I had a working product. I had just been turned down by 2 investors and accepted by 1. But standing in that kitchen, none of that felt real enough to say out loud. The Hendricks filing was delayed because Martin gave me the wrong intake date, I said. I have the email. Don't make excuses. That's not an excuse, that's documentation. He looked at me then. Finally, you've always thought you were smarter than the rest of us. Since you were 16, your brother never had this problem. And there it was. My brother had been working at my father's accounting firm since he was 22. He was 38 now, a senior partner, and he was perfectly good at the job and utterly miserable in it, though nobody in our family was allowed to say that out loud. He drove a BMW and had a house in Oakville and came to every Sunday dinner with his wife and 2 kids and said exactly the right things at exactly the right moments. He was the example. He had always been the example. I had worked at the firm too. For 8 years, I had filed returns and managed portfolios and driven to Mississauga to meet with clients who didn't want to meet with me and done everything that was asked of me. For 8 years, I had also been building something else, slowly, quietly, on my own time. I'm not trying to compete with my brother, I said. Clearly. My father stood up. You're going to lose that client. You're going to lose this job. And whatever you've been spending your time on instead of your actual work. I hope it's worth it. He picked up his newspaper. I want your desk cleared by Friday. My mother finally turned from the window. I thought for a moment she was going to say something. She pressed her lips together. Then she went to refill the kettle. My sister walked me to my car. She didn't say much. When I opened the driver's side door, she hugged me from behind, which was awkward and a little desperate and exactly what I needed. He doesn't know, she said quietly. I know he doesn't. Are you going to be okay? I sat in the car for a long time after she went back inside. The street was one of those quiet Etobicoke streets where nothing moves except the occasional dog walker. A red maple in the neighbor's yard had started to turn. I thought about calling someone, but I couldn't figure out who. My best friend from university was in Vancouver dealing with a newborn. My ex-boyfriend. Well, that was a long story and not a helpful one. I drove back to my apartment in Leslieville. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and I opened the email from the investor. His name was Mr. Reeves. He ran a small fund out of Waterloo that focused specifically on B2B tools for the trades industry. The email was 3 sentences long. He was in. $275,000, conditional, on a final pitch meeting in 6 weeks. I read it 4 times. Then I cried, not sad crying. The other kind. The kind that doesn't have a clean name. That's somewhere between relief and terror, and something you might call beginning. I didn't call my father to tell him. I thought about it. I rehearsed the conversation in my head twice. And then I remembered the way he'd folded his hands on the table, the way my mother had turned to the window, the way my sister had pretended to look at her phone, and I decided that some things needed time before they needed words. That was the last time I set foot in their house for almost 4 months. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I did not build my company to prove anything to my family. That might have been true once. Maybe when I was 26 and first started sketching out the idea on a notepad at my parents' kitchen table during the holidays. While my brother explained his year-end bonus structure in detail, maybe in those early months, there was some part of me that imagined a moment like this. A reveal, a vindication, a before and after. But that feeling fades when you're deep enough in the work. When you're on the phone at midnight with a beta user in Sudbury who can't figure out how to sync his job estimates with his QuickBooks, or when you're rebuilding an entire invoicing module from scratch because you realize the original version didn't account for Ontario's HST rules for mixed supply contracts, or when you're sitting across from an investor who is asking you to walk him through your churn rate and you're trying to hold your voice completely steady. At some point, the imaginary audience disappears. The work becomes just the work. But I am also human, and the morning I signed the papers with Mr. Reeves, sitting in a glass-walled boardroom in Waterloo with a coffee I was too nervous to drink, I thought about my father. I thought about the word excuses. I thought about the mug of cold tea. I let myself feel it for about 90 seconds. Then I signed. The 6 months after that were the hardest and also the most clarifying of my life. I hired my first full-time employee, a developer named Dex, who I had been working with as a contractor since the beginning and who was genuinely twice as good as me at the technical side. I moved out of my apartment in Leslieville and into a 2-bedroom in the annex, using one room as a home office. I had 12 beta users, and then 24, and then 60. I had a waiting list. I also had months where the money was terrifying, where I'd look at the runway in our account and do the math at 2 in the morning and wonder if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. My father ran a stable firm. My brother had a stable job. Stability was the value I had been raised to see as proof of adulthood. Every time I felt that fear, I could hear his voice. Not in a motivating way. Just present. The way certain sounds are always present in a house you grew up in. My mother called once, in February. She asked how I was doing. I said fine. She said, my father missed me. I didn't say anything to that. She asked if I was eating well. I said yes. We talked for 11 minutes, and neither of us said the thing we were actually talking about. My sister texted more regularly. She would send me articles about women in tech, or pictures of the dog she'd adopted, or voice memos that were always slightly too long and full of backtracking and filler words that I found deeply comforting. She was studying occupational therapy at U of T and working weekends at a climbing gym and living her life with a kind of cheerful stubbornness I had always admired in her. When I did ask, she'd just say, "Same, you know how he is. Same, you know how he is." I did know. By spring, we had 93 paying users. By early summer, that number was 171. Mr. Reeves introduced me to 2 more investors, and after a pitch process that I will never describe to anyone in full detail because it was equal parts thrilling and humiliating, we closed a seed round of just under $1.2 million. I moved the company into an actual office. A small one. 4 rooms in a shared workspace on King Street West, the kind of place with exposed brick and an espresso machine in the hallway, and an eclectic mix of other small businesses, doing things I only vaguely understood. I hired 3 more people. I signed a contract with a trade industry association that gave us access to their member network, which, in practical terms, meant our user base could grow in a way we hadn't quite planned for. I was tired in a way I had never been tired before. And also, I want to be precise about this. I was happy in a way I had never been happy before. Those 2 things coexisted. I don't think that's a contradiction. I had been running on maybe 6 hours of sleep for 3 months when everything changed again. It started with a phone call from my sister. "Don't freak out," she said, which is always a good opening. "What happened? Nobody's hurt." "It's nothing like that." She paused. Dad's firm is going through something. I don't totally understand it, but basically there's been a client situation. Something about an audit, and they lost the Morrow Group account. Which is apparently big. It was big. The Morrow Group was a mid-size real estate developer, one of the oldest and most consistent clients the firm had. I had worked on their files myself for 5 years. My brother? I asked. He's fine. He's stressed, but he's fine. He's been managing most of it. Another pause. Mom mentioned that Dad is looking for new clients, like actively, which apparently he hasn't had to do in a long time. I took that in. Okay, I said. I'm not telling you this because I think you should do anything, my sister said quickly. I thought you should know. In case what? She didn't answer that directly. How are you? She said instead. Tired, I said. But good tired or bad tired. The first one. She exhaled. Okay, good. 3 weeks later, my assistant forwarded me an email from a consulting firm that facilitated business development introductions. They were reaching out on behalf of a client who was looking to modernize some of their internal processes, specifically around client onboarding and billing, and had been referred to our platform as a potential fit. The client company, Whitmore & Associates, Chartered Professional Accountants. I read the name twice. Then I walked to the window of my office and looked out at King Street for a long moment. Whitmore & Associates was not my father's firm. That was not the story I am telling. What I am telling you is something more specific, and in some ways stranger, that the person who had been referred to us, who had requested a product demonstration, who was coming to our office the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, was my father's oldest professional contact. A man named Mr. Beaumont, who had been friends with my father since they were both junior accountants at the same Bay Street firm in the early 90s. A man I had met at least a dozen times at industry dinners and holiday parties. A man who would absolutely know my name. I thought about canceling. I thought about asking Dex to run the meeting instead. I thought about calling my sister. Then I thought about the meeting itself. What it would mean to walk into it cleanly, professionally, as the founder and CEO of something real, and let the work speak for itself. I kept the meeting. The morning of the Thursday demo, I wore the blazer I had bought specifically for investor meetings, dark green wool, excellent structure, the kind of garment that feels like armor in the most useful possible way. I reviewed our deck. I made sure the demo environment was loaded with a sample account that reflected a realistic trades business, an electrician in Hamilton, 12 active jobs, 3 outstanding invoices, a clean HST summary. My assistant, her name was Philippa. She was 26 and deeply unimpressed by anything that didn't work exactly as promised, confirmed the boardroom was set up. Coffee was ready, water on the table. Mr. Beaumont arrived at 2:05. He was the same as I remembered. Silver-haired, deliberate in his movements, the kind of person who fills a room not through volume, but through the particular quality of his attention. He was with a younger colleague I didn't recognize. He saw me and stopped. Not dramatically. He didn't stumble or make a sound. He just paused in the way a person pauses when their brain needs an extra second to reconcile two things that don't belong in the same picture. Meredith, he said. Mr. Beaumont. I smiled and extended my hand. It's good to see you. Please come in. He shook my hand. His grip was firm and a little slow, the handshake of a man recalibrating. I didn't realize, he started. Can I get you a coffee? I said, because I was not going to have this conversation in the doorway. We sat down. Philippa poured the coffee. I opened the deck and I ran the demo. 40 minutes, exactly as we had planned it. Mr. Beaumont asked good questions. He always had. That was one of the things I remembered about him. And his colleague took notes on a yellow legal pad, which I found almost endearing. I walked them through the contractor dashboard, the automated HST reminders, the integration with standard accounting software, the reporting tools that let a sole operator understand their business position in under 3 minutes. By the end, Mr. Beaumont had his arms crossed, and his head tilted to the side in the way that I had learned, over the course of many client meetings, meant genuine interest rather than skepticism. This is very well built, he said. Thank you. How long have you been running? We launched publicly 14 months ago. We're currently at just over 350 active users, predominantly in Ontario, with a growing base in Alberta. He nodded slowly. Then, does your father know about this? I kept my expression easy. We've been a little out of touch. He looked at me for a moment. I held his gaze without flinching, because there was nothing to flinch about. I had built a real company. I was sitting in a real office. The numbers I had just given him were accurate. Well, he said finally, I think he'd be surprised. Probably, I said. Mr. Beaumont signed a 12-month subscription agreement the following week. He also, apparently, had a long phone call with my father. I know this because my father called me on a Tuesday evening in late July. I was at my desk eating a bowl of leftover pasta and going through user feedback reports. I looked at my phone. I set down my fork, I answered. Meredith. His voice sounded different. Not softer, exactly. More careful. Hi, Dad. A pause. I spoke with Harold. Harold. I had never heard anyone call Mr. Beaumont Harold before. It made him sound suddenly human, suddenly fallible, the same as everyone else. I know, I said. He told me about your company. Okay. Another pause. Why didn't you tell us? I set down my pen. I tried, I said. Not enough times, maybe. But I tried. I thought about the kitchen, the cold tea, the folded hands. You weren't really asking. He didn't argue with that, which surprised me more than anything else he'd said. Harold says you have over 300 clients. 352 as of Monday. Silence. Your mother would like to see you, he said finally. We both would. I looked at the window of my office. The sun was going down over the city, and the light was doing the thing it does in July, in Toronto, that particular gold that makes everything look like it's been decided in your favor. Not yet, I said. He was quiet. I'm not saying no, I clarified. I'm saying not yet. I need a little more time. That's fair, he said. Which were two words I had never heard him string together in that direction before. I'll call you, I said. When I'm ready. Okay. We hung up. I sat there for a while. Then I finished my pasta and went back to the feedback reports. My sister called the next morning before 9. He told Mom you cried, she said. I absolutely did not cry. That's what I said. A beat. Did you? A little. After I hung up. That's allowed, she said firmly. I want to explain why I said not yet, because I think it matters and I think people get this wrong. It wasn't pride. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't some imagined scene I was waiting to orchestrate. I wasn't holding a grudge exactly. Or maybe I was. A little. In the way that you hold on to something, not to weaponize it, but because letting go too quickly would feel like lying about what happened. What I needed was more time to be sure that the version of me who walked back into that relationship was the right one. Not the 26-year-old sketching ideas on a notepad during Christmas dinner, hoping to be noticed. Not the 34-year-old standing in the kitchen being quietly dismantled. Someone newer. Someone who knew, not because she needed to prove it, but because she had lived it. That her judgment was worth something. That takes time. That is allowed to take time. The meeting I hadn't planned for happened in September. My company had been invited to present at the Ontario Contractors and Trades Association annual conference in Hamilton. It was a big deal for us, 300 attendees, a prime slot on the second morning, the kind of visibility that doesn't have a dollar value you can easily put in a spreadsheet, but changes things anyway. I had been prepping for it for 6 weeks. My brother surprised me with a text the night before. Good luck tomorrow. Harold told me, you've done something real. I stared at that text for a long time. My brother is not a person who sends texts like that. He sends texts that say, dinner Sunday? Or can you take Mom to her dentist app Thursday? Something real was for him practically a speech. I typed back, thank you. That means a lot. I meant it. The conference was at a hotel in Hamilton. I drove down early on a Tuesday morning with Dex and Philippa, a bag of printed materials, and a laptop I had backed up approximately 6 times. We set up our booth in the exhibition hall. The morning keynote ran long, and then a panel discussion ran even longer, and by the time my presentation slot arrived, I had been standing on my feet for 4 hours and had drunk too much bad conference coffee and was quietly vibrating with a combination of exhaustion and adrenaline that is its own very specific feeling. I walked to the podium. The room settled. I looked out at 300 people in the trades industry. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC contractors, small business owners who had spent their careers building things with their hands and were now sitting in stacking chairs in a Hamilton hotel ballroom to learn about software. And I felt something I did not expect to feel, which was absolute clarity. Not confidence, exactly. Clarity. Knowing exactly why I was standing in that specific spot, in that specific room, on that specific Tuesday morning. I spoke for 22 minutes. I didn't use notes. I talked about what our platform actually did and why it existed and who it was built for. And I showed a 3-minute demo on the screen behind me. And I told the story of one of our users, a plumber in Barrie who had spent 3 years doing all his invoicing by hand on a spreadsheet his nephew had built, who switched to our platform in January and recovered approximately 7 hours of admin time per week. And the room was quiet in the way. Rooms are quiet when they're actually listening, rather than just waiting for their turn to speak. At the end, I asked if there were questions. There were 14. Afterward, I was standing at our booth in the exhibition hall, talking to someone from a contractor association in Calgary, when I looked up and saw my parents walking toward me. Not together exactly. My father was a half step ahead, my mother slightly behind, the way they always moved in unfamiliar spaces. They were dressed like they were going to church. My father was holding a conference program, like he didn't know what to do with his hands. I finished my sentence to the Calgary contact, handed her Philippa's card, and turned to face them. The booth was busy enough that there was a natural moment of standing, of existing in the same space before words became necessary. My mother looked around at the signage, the demo screens, the lineup of people waiting to talk to us. My father looked at the banner above the booth with the company name and the tagline, "Built for the trades, built to last." He read it twice. I watched him read it. "We heard you speak," my mother said. Her voice was unsteady in a way I wasn't prepared for. "I know," I said. "I saw you come in. Why didn't you tell us you were presenting?" I thought about that question honestly. "I think I needed to do it without wondering what you thought of it," I said, while it was happening. My mother pressed her mouth together. Her eyes were bright. She nodded, once, like that answer was something she was putting somewhere to look at later. My father had not looked away from the banner. "I owe you an apology," he said. He said it toward the banner, not toward me, and then he made himself turn and say it again properly. "I owe you an apology, Meredith." "I know," I said. "I said things. I know what you said." He stopped. He seemed to understand that I wasn't shutting him down. I was just telling him that he didn't need to reconstruct the scene for my benefit. I had been there. I remembered. "I didn't ask," he said. "That was the failure. I never asked." My mother reached out and put her hand briefly on my arm, the way she had done when I was small and something had frightened me. It was so familiar that for a moment I had to look away. Philippa appeared at my elbow and told me the Calgary woman had a colleague who also wanted a demo. I nodded. I turned back to my parents. "I have to keep working," I said. "But I'm glad you're here." My father looked at me. He looked older than he had at Christmas, which I suppose was true. "We're proud of you," he said. I heard it differently than I would have once. Not because it didn't matter. It did, more than I wanted it to. But it no longer felt like something I had been waiting to earn. It felt like information about him. About where he was standing now, and how far he had moved to get there. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it as exactly what it was. Not a resolution, not a closing of accounts, just an acknowledgement between two people who had both been wrong about different things and were standing in a hotel exhibition hall in Hamilton trying to figure out what came next. My brother arrived 20 minutes later. He had driven from Oakville after my sister texted him the booth number. He walked in looking like himself. Pressed shirt, careful expression, slightly too aware of the space around him. He looked at the setup. He looked at the lineup at the demo screen. He looked at me. Then he laughed. It was the genuine kind, a little helpless. Okay, he said. I get it now. We went for dinner after the conference wrapped. The four of us, plus my sister, who had taken the GO train from Union. It was a pasta place near the waterfront, the kind with paper on the tables and a wine list written in chalk on a blackboard. Nobody said anything particularly profound. My father ordered something he couldn't pronounce and made a face when it arrived that made my mother laugh, which made my sister laugh, which is a specific kind of chain reaction I had not realized I had missed until it happened. I watched them across the table. I thought about the kitchen in Etobicoke, the cold tea, the sound of the kettle refilling. I thought about 352 users, about the electrician in Hamilton, who no longer did his invoicing by hand, about Dex working late in the office on King Street, and Felipa's particular expression of professional disappointment when anything failed to perform as expected, and Mr. Reeves, who had believed in something when it was still only an idea I had been carrying around for 3 years, without knowing what to do with it. I thought about the fact that none of that had been built to make this dinner possible, but that this dinner was happening anyway. My sister caught my eye across the table and raised her glass slightly, which could have meant anything, and probably meant everything. I raised mine back. I had left my parents' house 4 months ago with a duffel bag, and a decision I hadn't fully made yet. I had not left in order to return. I had left in order to become someone whose returning was a choice rather than a capitulation. Someone who could sit at a table in Hamilton and feel the difference between being loved for what she had achieved and being known for who she was, and understand that the second one was still in progress, and that in progress was not a failure. It was, in fact, the only thing worth building toward.